Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
Sam, I'm doing absolutely fantastically. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
You know who's not doing so well right now?
I have a few guesses, and Biden would probably be my first one with where we know we're taking this.
Anyone that's listened to this podcast and this for a while, that, of course, we're pro-business, which generally means that we come across as right of center. But historically, we have tried to stay away from blatantly political topics. However, the events of the last week or so really, they're just too big to ignore.
We talked about this when we were talking about podcast ideas that we wanted to discuss this week, and we were kind of like, you have to talk about this because it's been, there's been weeks that's I feel like been tougher to find new news topics to talk about, and this was the first. Okay, we got to talk about it one in a while. So,
you got to talk about it, what it could mean for the U.S. economy, and what it could mean for the U.S. markets, and what it could just mean for the U.S. society just in general. Of course, we're talking about the U.S. election. Of course, we're going to be talking about the most recent debate, which happened at the end of last week,
last Thursday
of last week. And listen, unless you were just absolutely so anti-Trump that you can't see anything, you're just so blinded by it. What happened last Thursday night during the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden was pretty difficult to watch.
Yeah, we talked about it. Debates are really not even about the talking points and who's right and who's wrong and what you have. I mean, it just doesn't matter. It's about how well you're doing, how healthy you are, how you portray yourself. It really is not about whether you lied or not as much. People are just taking things at face value, especially with this new format where they weren't allowed to really talk back.
Well, and that being the case, and Sam, I do a lot of public presentations, and I would tell you that over the years, I've learned something about public presentations. If you're at the rostrum, the speakers, whatever, and you can just get through it without ums and ahs and without stammering and falling over your tongue.
Or some big gaffe.
And we're just getting the facts so completely wrong that makes your presentation worthless. If you can get up there and get through a solid 30 minutes, 60 minutes, however long it is, be somewhat coherent and make a couple of salient points, even if you're not 100% correct, even if you don't slay it, people will still generally say, that was pretty good. You have to really try to get bad marks on a public presentation.
Yeah, and you got to think most people go into those knowing who they're probably going to vote for. You're looking for almost more affirmation than anything, and I think that's what a lot of people that were solidly in the Biden camp did not get, and were looking for just this little bit of affirmation. I mean, we know he's not the same Joe Biden that he was 10 years ago or whenever he was doing the debates.
Not the same John Norris I was 10 years ago.
He was not, we know he's not the same person that was debating Paul Ryan a decade plus ago. And no one's expecting that. They're just expecting to be able to carry on the conversations during the debate and to show that he can make the decisions that are needed to be made. And it, like you said, it's not about a Trump versus Biden thing. It's hard to not look at that and have at least a little bit of pause about his ability.
At least a little bit of pause, because no matter what happens, even if President Biden were for some reason to drop out of the race at this point, I think there are way too many people in Biden and company and just the Biden camp and really in the administration have too much to lose to let that happen without a fight, or at least a big check. I have a pretty difficult time thinking that the president's going to drop out prior to the convention, and maybe there'll be some turnover of parliamentary procedure. But the more I read about it, the more difficult it really does seem to be without Joe Biden willingly stepping aside. Very difficult to have him not be on the ticket come the first week in November.
And that's everyone had their first reaction to the debate. And then now we're kind of been able to digest it a little bit and say, what do things look like? And you hit a pretty important point that it's hard to force him out if he doesn't want to go out too. And the second part to me that makes this difficult is if he says he's not going to run again at this point, how late it is, how committed he's been, that's admitting that he's really probably not up to it, which also begs the question, how is he up to it right now?
And if that's the case, who's been running the country? And who's going to continue to run the country until January of next year?
Yeah.
And so these are real question marks, and it does beg the question: just in what state do we find ourselves in the United States when we have an 81-year-old man who, frankly, looked at sea last week, and then a 78-year-old man who really looked dynamic compared to the person he was debating against. However, is still a 78-year-old man prone to, let's just call it, hyperbole or self-aggrandizement.
Yeah.
And then if I were people throughout the remainder of the world, and of course Americans always want to say this, that, or the other thing, but if I'm looking at this as a foreigner, someone who is not an American, I have to be wondering, out of 330 plus million people, how did it come down to these two? And I wonder what sort of reaction people throughout the remainder of Western Europe, or really the global South, just really throughout the world, what do they think about the world's supposed superpower that is tearing itself at the seams, and then for leadership, they have two of the more divisive people that you could possibly have on the planet running the country, or trying to run the country.
It's tough because we're the one election that's always going to be in the spotlight. I mean, you and I have talked about other elections, but for the large majority of people, I think you could ask what's going on in France.
I guarantee you I could drive to your favorite town, Wotonka.
Yep.
Or really, or any other, or heck, I could drive
across the street.
I can go down to downtown Homewood, suburb here in Birmingham, and say, Independence Day is happening on July the 4th. All right, okay. Do you know what's happening in the United Kingdom on July the 4th?
Yeah.
And I can guarantee you, I could ask 10 people that, and 7 of them would have no clue that they were holding an election.
I would take the over on that.
You would take the over on that? All right, fair enough.
Same with France. Same with
France.
although
the French have developed our election techniques, it's a week. You know, they have a full week to count the votes.
Yeah.
It used to be instantaneous in the United States, but now we're taking French standards, I suppose. But, you know, we do have a lot of elections, and the U.S. election is always going to be the one of the greatest visibility. I mean, for all intents and purposes.
Because it is the largest free election.
I mean, it's the largest free election, and the president is, for all intents and purposes, his imperial, or her, if the case ever comes to pass, his imperial majesty, and really sets the tone for the so-called developed world, and up till now, that has set the tone for the entire world.
Yeah.
And so when we have that, and we have the candidates that we have, and we have performance that particularly Mr. Biden had last week, it really does beg the question, just how strong is the United States going to be over the next 4 years? Obviously, the remainder of the world isn't a huge Trump fan. However, if I'm a Maloney, if I'm a Macron, if I'm a Schultz, or it doesn't really matter what Sunak thinks, he's out of the job on Friday morning. But if I'm global leaders, what am I thinking? In your estimation alone, not necessarily depending on Oakworth Capital Bank or anything like that, in your estimation alone, how does the remainder of the world view what they saw last Thursday, and how do they extrapolate out 4 more years, knowing that your choices are either going to be Joe Biden, who has clearly slipped, or Donald Trump, who is nothing if nothing short of a loose cannon.
Yeah, if I was leading one of those countries, my viewpoint would be, okay, we need to start focusing on being more self-reliant. Would be my first thought of it. And my second thought is there's an opportunity for us to not become the United States global superpower. That's not gonna happen. But to play a bigger role, be a bigger part of the stage of setting that global policy and being a driver of it. And because really, it's still the U.S. that's driving it. I mean, I couldn't point to any of the other G7 countries that are really, taking the bull by the horns and driving the global North policy.
I would
maybe as a group they are at times, especially when Trump was in office and the rest tended to oppose him. But that's what I would be thinking about is this, the U.S. is still the superpower. They're still the greatest country on earth, I would say. USA. But this is a good, you kind of want some forewarning before you have to do something. That's what I would be talking about is this is our forewarning. We need to be more self-reliant.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And actually, I think out of all the remaining members of the G7, I think the one that gets that the most might be Macron. He actually would love to be a reincarnated version of Charles de Gaulle, in my opinion.
Napoleon.
Napoleon might not be able to pull that one off, but at least Charles de Gaulle, very, very much of a Frankist and all that stuff. And I think he would like to do that. However, there's something about Emmanuel Macron that's not very likable, and as a result, he's going to get thumped in this week's elections as well.
Yeah.
Which kind of leaves it to me. Sunak's going to get thumped. Justin Trudeau's going to get thumped later on this year whenever they have their elections.
Yeah, they have to have it by next year or something.
If nothing changes, he's going. I mean, he'll be put out on an ice floe. Schultz is he is the anti-Merkel. I mean, just really, I mean, just glass of lukewarm water. I mean, a white toast sandwich. I mean, and then you have Meloni, and frankly, Meloni, if she were in the UK or France or Germany, might be able to pull a little bit more weight, but.
The Italians have some.
I would say the Italians, and no offense to anyone in Italy.
Love Italy.
No offense to Giorgia Meloni. Italy is probably, in my estimation, maybe the weakest of the G7.
I think that's almost inarguable.
Yeah, well, I mean, and people say Canada, and it's nothing against
Canada
the Canadians either. It's just population, and size of the economy, size of the military, all that stuff, and just, frankly, history as well. At post-Roman Empire, history, of course. But she doesn't have the capability of doing that. So whoever runs the U.S. kind of runs the G7, kind of sets the tone for the global North. And if I am Xi Jinping, or I am even Modi, or I'm Vladimir Putin, I'm looking at this going, I can't believe my good fortune.
Yeah, and we've talked about this. This is a long-term trend, and we talk in 4 years, and they talk in dynasties.
Yes,
or centuries at least.
Yeah,
and so we're playing different games, and we've talked about this a long time ago in the stock market. That the longer you hold on to something, the better your odds are of succeeding in the markets. And it's this kind of the same theory with politics too.
Yeah.
The longer you are focused on, when you're focused on 2 years and 4 year cycles, you're focused on probably the wrong things, and that's always going to be the case.
I would say I cannot disagree with you on that. One of my favorite expressions. I can't disagree with you on that. And I'll tell you, this comes at a very good time for the Chinese. I would say that China, probably due to the very nature of its economy and society, is probably reaching its acme, if you will, in terms of economic growth. Obviously, it's slowed a lot with the housing and real estate bubble over there. However, given the full extractive nature of that society, given the, let's just say, lack of property rights and the, let's call it, opaque rule of law, there's only so much further it can go from here. It grew so rapidly, so quickly, because it was coming off of nothing. It does have natural resources and a very highly literate workforce with a good work ethic. It was going to grow, but at some point, if you don't give your people property rights, you don't give them rule of law, you don't give them innovation.
Right.
And as a result, I do think that they're going to slow. So this comes to me, if I was Xi Jinping, this comes at a beautiful time. Absolutely, as I'm building up my army and I'm building up my navy to throw my weight around a little bit more, as I'm coming to grips with the fact that maybe the easy money has been made, given my economic institutions, I can still grow, just not as rapidly, that all of a sudden the United States is voting itself into weakness in some form or fashion, meaning that I can continue to be a jerk, I can continue to push my own people around, I can continue to threaten people in the Spratly Islands, I can continue to do what I want, and the United States is going to be so distracted that it's not going to be able to do much about it.
Yeah, and it begs the question, what changes that for us? And I don't know the answer to that. What shifts the U.S. off of its, it's not a doom and gloom trajectory, but it's an opportune time for the Chinese, like you said, and other countries as well. What shifts us off of this kind of slowly weakening trajectory that I'd argue we've been on for probably a couple decades?
It would have to be someone with unique leadership skills. that wanted to come in and actually do what's right. And that's going to be difficult in today's day and age with social media, with instantaneous access to information, and really the type of people that would want to run for power in today's age. It's going to be very difficult to find that person that has that unique unifying skill set. We haven't had that really for literally decades. But the United States historically has always found that person at some point, and I'm hesitant to say that we will never find that person again. However, I would tell you that when I take a look at the bench strength for either major political party, I'm not so confident that it's going to come by the time I turn 60.
No, I mean, the last two I can think of that were dominant were probably Nixon and Reagan.
Reagan, certainly, his reelection, I mean, he thrived. Mondale.
Nixon was pretty dominant, too, I believe.
But he was running against Goldwater.
Yeah.
I mean, not Goldwater, he was running against Hubert Humphrey. I mean, that was just beach ball. So, and I don't want to be talking about Richard Nixon. You got criminal.
Hey, not anymore, apparently.
That's right.
In the line of duty.
So, in talking with folks around here and talking to people of my age, and really, obviously, we live in the state of Alabama, which is historically very conservative or right of center, or red state, if you will, and not just redneck, but red in terms of being GOP or Republican. I will tell you, Sam, what I noticed was after the debate on Friday, there were very few people high-fiving that Trump kicked Biden's ass.
No, the conversation wasn't even about Trump.
The conversation wasn't about Trump. The conversation wasn't laughing. The conversation wasn't any of that as what you might expect it would have been. Basically, to a person that I've spoken with about the debate was, dare I say, concern for Joe Biden. Dare I say, concern for the executive power in this country, and even concern for the United States as a whole.
Yeah, that's 90% of the conversation. And they cut the mics off so you couldn't interrupt, but the one Trump comment was he seemed a little more restrained than I think he had been at previous times in his inability to not say something back. Partly, again, due to the microphones, but 95% of it was, I mean, I told you this. I didn't plan on watching it, and I turned it on because it happened to be right when it started, and he sounded so bad that I felt inclined. I had to watch it. I had to keep watching this. I said, "There's 90 minutes of this," and it just continued. And so, it's hard to not have that be the focal point.
Okay, now that we've kind of gotten all that out of the way, let's talk about, this might run a little bit long here this week, and I apologize for that. It's a topic that everyone's very interested in, everyone has an opinion on. We now have to talk about what this potentially means for the markets and the economy, not just through the remainder of this year, but what it means going into 2025. Sam, I'm going to start with you. Coming from your experience in the markets and just your generation, what do you think this all means in terms of the lives of the average American?
For the election, it's it's pretty important election coming up. I feel like we've talked about, we're at this kind of pivotal point, but I feel like the markets and the economy these next 6 months will kind of tell us a lot of what these next 4 years are going to look like. I think markets like to look a little bit forward looking, and I think you can simplistically look at it in first half, second half, always looking forward to the next 6 months. So we're going to start getting the markets sentiments on what 2025 is going to start looking like. And so I think we're going to start to see a lot more volatility in the markets probably around what it's going to look like next year. And it is an unknown. It's an unknown with how far away we are from actually being inaugurated, and we're already talking about changing possible candidates.
Well, I would tell you that the die is largely cast for 2024, as Sam largely alluded to.
Yeah.
Capital spending cycle has already been made, and businesses are either going to spend or they're not going to spend. It doesn't really matter what happened in the debate last week. It's based on whether or not they think that they can make money over the next 6 months and all that good stuff. As I've mentioned here in the past and in our blog/newsletter Common Sense, the U.S. economy is like a battleship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It doesn't turn on a dime. It doesn't stop immediately.
Yep.
Turn radius is measured in kilometers or miles, and it takes a little while to slow the thing down to a stop without completely reversing the engines and really probably breaking the whole machine room. Or a bomb,
Sure, yeah.
that type of deal. So I would say what's going to happen in 2024 is almost predestined. We just don't know what it looks like. And I would say even, you might disagree with me on this, even heading into 2025, a lot has already been preordained or predestined. All the largesse that Washington has thrown on the economy with the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which is poorly named, all that is going to continue into 2025. The spending, the deficit
A
spending.
lot of it hasn't been spent.
Yeah, it hasn't been spent. All that's still going to be out there. It's going to be very difficult to do much about that to stop that spigot from running. So all of that's going to happen. So this is all sort of it's really sort of the back end of 2025 when you can start seeing, okay, the election has had it's there. We now have, let's say, a Trump presidency. What does that mean? We have another 4 years of Joe Biden or whatever is behind door number let's call it D for Democrat. What's ever behind door number D, and what does that all mean? Now, I would tell you that it's hard to differentiate the two parties sometimes anymore. It's almost like Alice falling through a looking glass. I mean, the Republicans are now the party of the working class, it seems, and party of tariffs, and party of closed immigration. It's whereas 30 years ago, if you told me that, I would have said you're absolutely nuts. Yeah. However, so much has changed. I would tell you that for economic activity, tariffs are not good.
Yeah.
Both parties really kind of want to do them. So I'm not really all that thrilled up in terms of generating economic profit. I don't think that's a real good idea. The administration has floated the idea of increasing the capital gains tax dramatically, taking it from 20% at the federal level, I think, to 38.8, or taking it essentially to the highest marginal tax rate, not really differentiating between small cap and short term and long term any longer, which I think is a disastrous, absolutely disastrous piece of policy, because the capital gains tax, in my estimation, is really nothing more than a capital constraint, and a capital constraint inhibits the free flow of money throughout the financial system, which is always anathema to economic growth. We have the 2017 tax cuts all ending at the end of next year. What happens if a Biden's in presidency or Trump? And Trump, this probably get extended, maybe even the estate tax laws. However, Biden comes in, we're going to be seeing higher taxes moving into 2026. We're going to see that estate tax go back probably to a $5 to $6 million exemption per person, which is still a gracious plenty. Don't get me wrong on that, but it will change how a lot of people position their portfolios and do their planning. And I would imagine that moving into 2026, regardless of what happens, unless we have a recession between now and then, we will likely be facing a really interesting 2026 that is more heavily reliant on politics than I would say it normally is.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is not being talked about a lot is, I think if we get kind of a flush in one party in control of all the House, Senate, and the presidency, neither party is really in tune with a tight budget anymore. If we it's non-existent. It is not a Republican versus Democrat thing. You can look at Trump's budget ex the COVID spending, and it was still trillions and trillions of dollars.
Yes.
And if we get a clean sweep through it, we're already running budget deficits that are only justified in war or depression.
Yes.
Right now, at a time where we're now on 8 straight quarters of strong economic growth, largely due to some of the spending, but nonetheless, we're not in a recession.
No.
Unemployment's at historical lows still, even with a tick up lately. If we get the spigots opened up completely, I mean, they're already pretty open. And
yes,
it's just a matter of which way a little bit of the spending goes. But if we let capital, the tax dollars, money we don't have, to flow as freely as it wants to through one party, either party is going to be disastrous. I mean, even Jay Powell, who can't really talk about this stuff, is talking about it today, that this is not sustainable. And it's only going to get worse because nobody wants a tight budget or a balanced budget.
No one likes fiscal austerity. No one likes it when their paycheck is cut, when the freebies run out. No one likes that type of stuff. No one likes it when the punch bowl is taken away. It kind of makes you wonder whether or not we've gotten to a point in our nation's history where our political elite has just decided it's much easier to placate the masses with bread and circuses than it is to actually try to govern. And I could make a strong argument that what passes for entertainment in this country is circuses, and then the amount of money the government throws at us in various forms or fashions is bread. And so when you take a look at all that, I wonder whether or not Washington really cares about being fiscally austere, really cares about truly improving the institutions in the country, understanding that by doing so, doing what has to be done, they would be losing their core bases and therefore losing their power.
Yeah, it's things get done through reconciliation, which is just this kind of back of the math, offsetting things with another. You're not really doing anything. And these are all projections, too. At the end of the day, we're spending the monthly deficits we're running are more than we used to run over a couple years. Hundreds of billions of dollars.
And you've got to live with this a lot longer than I do.
Well, my kids have to live with it even longer.
So, with that, we have already gone on a little bit longer than normal. This might be a two-parter here because there is a lot going on. Historically, and I've been doing this for quite a long time, I have said that politicians get too much credit for the good times and too much blame for the bad. Moving forward, I might have to alter that a little bit, regardless of who wins here in November. Unless we really get serious about what's happening, not just in our country, but around the world. It's not necessarily the Democrats can't declare ownership of all the problems, nor can the Republicans. It really is Washington just in general. So whoever gets in power after November 5th, whether or not it be Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or if all of a sudden both parties wake up and try to put someone else into the nominations, we're going to have to see a greater amount of bipartisanship. We're going to have to see a greater amount of adults returning into to the room, to use that old expression. And we're really going to have to try to find someone that tries to unify our country a little bit more, because we can't continue to go on this and continue to claim economic hegemony around the entire world, and we can't continue to go on like this and expecting people to follow us.
I agree.
All right. With that being said, gang, thank you all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you all. So if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, where you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, you can go to oakworth.com, oakworth.com, take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab, and find access to all kinds of exciting information, including links to previous Trading Perspectives podcasts, links to our blog/newsletter Common Sense, as well as links to our quarterly analysis, Macro and Market, which we are diligently working on as you listen to this. All right, that being said, Sam, at least for this week, do you have anything else on this very exciting topic?
That's all I've got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.